Okay, well, I think we can get going. Hello and welcome to this very special edition of the UC Center Sacramento Speaker Series. Before we proceed with introduction of today's speaker, um, a few announcements. After today, we will be taking a break in our speaker series until June 23rd, at which time we'll welcome Professor and Dean Louis Rodriguez from UC Riverside to discuss ways to promote validating practices and policies in education for Latino students. And then a week later, on June 30th, we will, one could say in the interest of balance, um, have a discussion with Chancellor Castro of Cal State University System. We expect he'll address many of the same issues we're likely to cover today with President Drake: access, quality, diversity, and innovative ways to accelerate California's journey towards a better future through higher education. One logistic note: please type your questions into the Q&A uh, application within Zoom, and our staff will attempt to group them and put the question to the speaker at the end. So now to today's guest. Michael Drake, MD, is the 21st president of the University of California. He previously served as president of The Ohio State University. Prior to his 6 years at the OSU, his entire academic career has been at the University of California, including as Chancellor of UC Irvine from 2005 to 2014, and as the System-Wide Vice President for Health Affairs from 2000 to 2005, where, by the way, I had the opportunity to work with him as part of a faculty task force launching the California Health Benefits Review Program, which almost 20 years later still works to assist the legislature in evaluating laws that would mandate specific health insurance benefits. President Drake received his bachelor's degree from Stanford University and his MD from UC San Francisco. He spent more than 2 decades on the faculty of the UCSF School of Medicine, including as the Stephen P. Shearing Professor of Ophthalmology. He has way too many accomplishments to list in full, but among them, he guided UC Irvine to its current place as a top 10 US public university, while increasing 4-year graduation rates by almost 20%. He also oversaw the establishment of new schools of law and education, as well as programs in public health, nursing, and pharmacy. In his academic life, Dr. Drake has published numerous articles and co-authored 6 books. He's a member of the National Academy of Medicine and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He received the UCSF School of Medicine's Clinical Teaching Award, plus many honors for his research and service. He's also a member of many prestigious boards, which I won't list, but I can't resist calling out his position as a member of the board of directors of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an organization that just named Tina Turner, Carole King, and Jay-Z as 2021 inductees. I predict that today's conversation with President Drake will honor that same spirit of eclecticism. And now we bring you President Drake. President Drake, would you like to say a few words, or shall we launch right into some questions?
Well, maybe I'll say a few words, Richard. Then we can. I look forward to questions, and I appreciate you mentioning the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and this year's class, and maybe we'll get into that a little bit more as we go forward. But I'll say that this year's class really was an effort on behalf of some board members. I'll raise my hand as being one of them, to look at the inclusiveness of the most recent inductees. And so I was very pleased. And I'll say maybe a little later a specific word about Tina Turner and her pathway and how important that is. And but that you can let me know when it's time to mention that. But it's a non-trivial thing, and I'm happy to be working with it. And I'm honored broadly to be with everyone. I wish that I could be there in person. I know that we are all moving in that direction. So I encourage people to get vaccines, stay safe. And I think that within these next few weeks, we should continue to see a real change in our ability to get back to a more normal life. And I appreciate, let me say also at the beginning, the entire team at the UC Center in Sacramento for inviting me and making this possible. And I'm particularly actually looking forward to hearing from students who are participating in the UC Center Sacramento program. And I'd love to hear what's on your minds, and that's always a great privilege for me. I'll say that it's great to be back at the University of California. I was here for many years, as you mentioned, Professor Kravitz. And, I was a student and a resident and a postdoc and a faculty member. I did some administrative work, of course, and really grew up largely at the University of California. So I appreciate that. And during my time at the university, I spent a lot of time in Sacramento. I graduated from high school in Sacramento. I went to community college in Sacramento. I lived there and worked at Tower Records in Sacramento, which is probably the connection with the Rock and Roll Hall now. And my parents lived there for the last 50 years of their lives. And so that we had a long connection there. And so I spent a lot of time there and a lot of time in the Capitol and working with legislators. And it's a big and important part of my career and something I always enjoyed. So I'm really happy that we have the UC Center there to be able to connect other people to the work that happens, the things that we can do to enrich the UC students' education with real world experience, and really the firsthand understanding of policymaking and leadership and issues that impact California and Californians every day. The center does quite a lot. I'll say that we have a new May revised budget, and this goes in different ways. In my first years at the Office of the President, the state was doing well, and so the May revised would have additional funds. We then went into the Great Recession, where the May revised was more mid-year cuts. We're really pleased that this year the governor and the legislature have shown their commitment to higher education by enhancing our budget and helping us to do a whole series of things that are very important to us. It will help students to thrive. It will expand access to high quality education. It will let us actually help to protect the environment by focusing on some deferred maintenance in an environmentally sensitive and sustainable way. And then again, specific groups of students will be able to support at the higher levels that we believe are necessary. So we appreciate that and really do thank the governor for what he's done and the legislature for what they are doing. Our partnerships with the state are really critical, and they serve the public good. These relationships are important to us. And one of the ways that we reflect on those is by being in Sacramento ourselves on a regular basis. And it's really impressive as we look at the list of topics that UC experts, where UC experts weigh in. And the speaker series is one way that we demonstrate that. But I know over the last few months, you've had UC experts who spoke on predicting wildfires, on understanding the impact of the pandemic on the economy, on things as important as groundwater management, and then on mass incarceration. So really a wide range of things that we talk about, and we're happy to be able to have people who study these things and live these lives be a part of this series. I'm also very happy at the impact that UC research and teaching has had broadly in helping California policymakers find evidence-based solutions to help Californians in their daily lives. You mentioned the California Health Benefits Review Program, and it's really a program that we set up, remember it well, we set it up to use faculty expertise to take the study of the impact of new legislation on insurance coverage. Was this a cost-effective thing? Was this good for the public health? Did it enhance the quality of the health and lives of Californians? Or was it something that might be more costly than it was worth, et cetera? And we created a circumstance where we could look at that in an academic way. It could be a part of the academic careers of faculty and students. And it was a 2-year program when it started, and then it was reauthorized and seemed to produce results that were useful. And then pleased to see that here we are almost 20 years later, and the program has become a mainstay. And it's a great way that the university's research and teaching mission and the state's need for quality data overlap and allow us to get to a better product. So we're really pleased about that. I'll say I was talking just earlier today. I had a wonderful meeting with a group of emeritus faculty, mostly connected with UC Berkeley. And there are people I'd worked with over the years. 2 of them had been chancellors in the past, and it was a great group of people to work with. And it reminded me of the importance of mentors and how people who help to guide us can help to influence your choices, shape your path, and support you forward. And so I wanted to make sure that we mention that, and maybe we'll have a chance to talk a little bit about mentors and the importance of mentoring, particularly for the students, as we look forward to that discussion. And I say another thing that I think is that we're seeing a lot, and it affects us every day here in this office, is policy, and how really important policy issues change the course of our future. Good decisions and good policy help to make things better. Decisions that are less well considered, or policies that are less well considered, can be a real barrier to us doing our normal work, and can really be a burden. And so, and these things affect real people, sometimes not directly in one's vision, but in places that you can't see. And so we have to think, we always try to think about the real people who are affected by the policies that we are working to support, and or those that may be suggested that we think are perhaps less well advised than they might be. And learning about this and being involved in Sacramento is a very important part of that. One of the policies that was important, interestingly, in my career for a couple of reasons, was the policy change that we had in the state on affirmative action. The state, I thought, inappropriately and unwisely led the way on affirmative action bans back in the 1990s with the Proposition 209. The regents, in fact, had done a bit of this within the University of California on their own. And my role at the time, I was associate dean for admissions at UCSF School of Medicine, and we had this special thing. We had a program right at about the time these changes were made. We had a program that was the most selective medical school in the country, meaning the greatest number of applicants per place, the highest grades and test scores, the most highly selective medical school in the country, #1 rated. At the same time, it was the most diverse medical school in the country. And there are many people who said, gosh, the excellence that would be reflected by the selectivity, by the difficulty of being admitted, would be at the cost of diversity, or the diversity that you had would be at the cost of academic and scholastic excellence. We had a program that led the country in both aspects. 2 out of the 7 years that I was in that position, we led the country in both aspects. And when we didn't lead, when we weren't #1, we were #2 or 3 or 4. So really at the top of the road in both. And so we talked about the policy change that came through, and how this was really made it difficult for us to maintain this. And it really did have a negative impact on our diversity. And that's been costly. It's been recovered in many ways, in many parts of our enterprise, but it took years and years of effort to be able to reinstate the pathways for access that we had established by the early 1990s. And I think that was a costly change, and something that I wouldn't have supported. So policy is important, and I want to say it really does make a difference, really does have repercussions and ramifications. And I'm glad that you are all there paying attention to the policy side of our enterprise. And I think that gives us good hope for the future. And I think that I loved our discussion. So let me just stop there and go on to the questions. And I'd love to hear from you, Dr. Kravitz.
Great. Well, thanks, President Drake. You've touched on so many important themes, and I hope we'll have an opportunity to have you elaborate on many of them as we go through our discussion. But you mentioned having personal ties to Sacramento, growing up here, having family ties. Can you tell us a little more about your own experiences here in our fair city that shaped the leader you would become?
Yeah, shape the leader that you become sounds a little much, but I'll tell you about what it's meant, and appreciate that. I was born in New York City. We moved into Englewood, New Jersey, just across the river, and I began school there. We moved to Sacramento when I was in 3rd grade, and I grew up in South Sacramento, which is actually kind of the center. It's right close to where the zoo is. So Sacramento has moved way far south from when we moved there, but we were about 1.5 miles from the edge of the city when we moved there on Southland Park Drive, and so I finished grade school and went through high school in suburban Sacramento of the 1960s. The things that were most important to my career today, I guess the 2 things I'll mention, one sort of whimsical, but one more important. For whatever reason, I went to McClatchy High School. For whatever reason, as a senior, I was moved forward. We were accelerated because the baby boomers were crowding schools. So I finished high school when I was 16. I turned 17 just a bit after that. So I was a bit ahead. I was 1.5 years ahead of my normal class grade. And I was elected president of the high school. And so that was the first time that I had to wear a tie, to school. I gave speeches and was in a role where I used the gavel and presided over meetings. And it turned out to be something that seemed interesting and fun, and really led to a whole series of other leadership positions that I had. You mentioned I've had these positions here working. I'm on a series of boards, and I've had gavels on those boards. And really a lot of that came from the working with people, addressing issues, and the fact that it seemed to work well, and I enjoyed it. And I really always kept that aspect of my life moving forward from those Sacramento days. The other thing that happened in Sacramento is, the original Tower Records in the Tower Theater there was about a little over a mile from Matachi High School. So I knew it well growing up. And when the record store opened and I needed a summer job, I was able to go there and work with people I'd gone to high school with. And that actually fostered my interest in music and the connectivity of music, where music came from, and how it just didn't just come out of thin air, but there was somebody who wanted to say something or to write something or perform something, and it meant something about the personal and political and social circumstances of the artist. And I think that's true for art generally, but I learned that, I think, through popular music art. And if I could say something more just quickly about that, we had this thing there back in the day called the shrink wrap machine. And the shrink wrap machine meant that if you opened a record and played it but didn't mar it in any way, you could put it back in the wrapper and it would get wrapped, and then it could be sold again as new. And so it let us, we didn't talk about it, but it was sold again as new, and it's fine. But it meant that working at the record store, you could play anything you wanted anytime. And it's something that people can do today through a streaming service. But 50 years ago, it was entirely impossible. No one had 10,000 or 20,000 records that you could just play. But that great facility, which I absolutely appreciated and loved at the time, meant that I could listen to an artist, see who the people playing with him or her were, and then go and listen to their music as well, and draw the connections that they made as this tree of musical collaboration branched throughout the future. And so that was a meaningful thing for me to learn, and led to a course that I teach now, and then led to me being on the board of the Rock Hall. So two Sacramento experiences, I think, that are relevant to me today.
Yeah, it occurs to me that the dexterity involved in placing the needle very gently on the record probably came in handy as an ophthalmologist.
A steady hand was very important. Absolutely right.
Yeah. Well, as you know, this past year has been an extremely challenging time for many Californians. Looking ahead to the next 6 months and beyond, you alluded to this a bit, but what do you see as the biggest hurdles for policymakers and the people they represent in California? And what, if anything, gives you hope?
I guess I'd answer that in a general way and say that the biggest hurdle always for policymakers is to create positive, good policies that don't have unintended consequences, and really do help us all to move forward, and to not let the politics of the possible get in the way of what is necessary or good. And I've unfortunately seen that happen, and I think that's the most important thing. What gives me hope is that I've known dozens of legislators at the state and federal level, dozens and dozens, truly. And these are people who are dedicated, intelligent, really, really hardworking, and overwhelmingly make changes to our rules and devise and promote policies that are to the benefit of our society. And so I always have hope that working together with our colleagues, we can get to good outcomes. We have high quality people who we've elected, who want the right things to happen, want the best things to happen. We just have to continue working together to make sure we all are working from the same data, and that helps us to get to the best outcomes.
For both the policymakers and academics in the audience, you alluded to mentorship earlier. What can they do to help nurture and become the next generation of California's leaders? And how do you envision UC in general and the UC Center specifically playing a part in this?
Yes, well, I'd say that mentorship is really important. I think about it all the time and people who've really helped me. And I think that the ability to form relationships across generations and for younger people to be able to form relationships with people who have done some of the things that younger people are thinking about is very helpful. It's incredibly stimulating and valuable for the mentor to be able to work with the new generation, to hear things from a different perspective. So I think that that's really important. And as I said, it's I'm really pleased that we have a program like this one that lets state lawmakers, agencies, and other organizations to provide hands-on learning opportunities for our students. And I know that our students teach them a lot as well. And I'll say this: I've had, as I mentioned, the pleasure of working with lots of different legislators, and we're really pleased at the support that we have from the governor and the legislature to help us in those programs that are the most helpful to supporting our students moving forward. Support services, solid financial aid, and in the May revise, there was real great support, particularly for some of our most vulnerable students, and we hope to help them and continue to move things forward.
Yeah, we often say that there's a big gap between knowing what and knowing how, and the opportunities to actually experience what goes on and what happens within the legislative and executive branch has been really critical for our students, many of whom have gone on to careers in government policy and other leadership roles.
Yes.
Well, on sort of a broader landscape, you've been in your current office only a relatively short time, but what are your aspirations for the University of California during your tenure and beyond?
A couple of things, I guess. One, a kind of basic, I always want to make sure that all of us appreciate the quality of the University of California. I mean, I think that we have it and we get used to it, and I think we take it, forgive me, but we tend to take it for granted. I've been in other places, and I know and I've worked with many of my colleagues from around the country, and the University of California system really is the envy of all such systems in this country and really around the world. Other universities, when they are trying to set lofty goals for their own achievement and productivity, look at the University of California as a whole or our individual campuses and aspire to be more like us. And so I want to just make sure that I and all of us continue to appreciate that, and then work to maintain the access, increase the access, the affordability, and the excellence of the university as we go forward. We want to make it better every day. We want to have clear pathways for access and to keep the university as a truly affordable bargain, and then improve that as well. The other thing that I think that, and you mentioned this a little bit more, that in our connections with the Sacramento Center, we always want to expand incredible faculty. And we want to expand the reach of our faculty to make sure that the people hear about and learn about the research. And your speaker series has been one way that has happened. We also want to be able to have products that get out there, and the good ideas get through technology transfer or licensed and able to help people in real ways. And then we want to make sure that the research that we are doing is informed by the issues that are affecting real people. So that's an important thing for us to do. We have big issues. I'll say two of them that are really big issues that we're working on. I say big issues, I understate, like really big issues. One is climate change, and we want to continue to be leaders in the fight against climate change, to work to have a more sustainable future. It's an imperative for us. And we just have to continue to work every day to live more sustainable lives, and the university has an important role there. And then another one that we're working on that's a big issue is social justice in the country, the role of policing and security, and how that's done in the country, and the real, we have to be better at that. We're not at a satisfactory place there. We have much good work that's done, much great work that's done, much courageous work that's done, but we have too much work that is harsh and inappropriate and does not affirm people's lives. And so we want to do what we can to push ourselves to model the most inclusive and supportive methods of keeping our campus communities safe and thriving. So those are some things that we're thinking about on a daily basis.
Yeah. Small goals.
Yeah.
You talked about diversity at UCSF and of course, under your leadership at UC Irvine, the diversity of the undergraduate population increased significantly. What do you think are the key elements of engendering durable, long-term cultural change towards greater equity and inclusion?
Great American question, really great question for the world, is how can we be better at greater equity and inclusion? I had the privilege last night of participating in a podcast with His Holiness the Dalai Lama in honor of the 20th anniversary of the Dalai Lama professorship at UC Santa Barbara. And he spoke, and it was always wonderful to hear him speak. He spoke of the value of hope and compassion and loving kindness as being very, very important things. And as a construct for that, he said, we have a 7 billion person family, that we're all the same. And that there are small differences here or there, but he said we're all, in his terms, brothers and sisters. We're all connected to this same human family. And these differences that we see are manufactured and then cause us or give us reasons for conflict and harm. How he said it was, if you were walking and saw someone who had a third eye in the forehead, he'd say, well, that person's different. He said, but if you have 2 eyes and a nose and a mouth, you look like a person to me. We're a part of that family. I mean, he said it he chuckled as he said that, and so that we're all awfully similar. And so I think that one of the things we need to do is to recognize that we're all this one human family. And then we have to be very intentional and recognize the ways that we don't act on that reality, that we identify, we categorize, and we treat people differently because of a variety of things that we deem to be important characteristics. And so one of the things we want to do at our universities is to try to create pathways for people to come to the university community from different areas of society that have been segmented or marginalized. And we worked actively on that at UC Irvine. We worked actively on that at The Ohio State University. We work actively on that now. We want to be an inclusive, enabling, empowering community. And I think it's the way for all of us to be our very best.
Yeah, thank you. In a somewhat related vein, do you have any thoughts on how the university can best support students and perhaps its faculty for that matter in engaging in meaningful conversation with people or groups with whom we disagree? It seems to me this is one of the biggest problems facing our country, is that
Yeah.
we've abandoned conversation.
Well, disagree is one word I would use. The other, many times we just see things from a different perspective, and realizing that we can see things from a different perspective, and then allowing that to be true, and that no one of us has all the answers or the entire range of views or perspectives. I think that's a realization. So I have 2 answers to that, if I may. So one is an exercise I went through with Larry Sin from Sin Delaney when we had a retreat at my office a couple of years ago, and then the other is some programs that we have initiated and that we think have worked well, and that I would love us to expand. So the exercise was, there was my immediate office, and there were about 15 of us, I think, and we're sitting in a semicircle, and the moderator had us all look at a screen, and then he showed a picture, a collage. And the collage had 50 different items on it, I would say. So there would be a stoplight, the Eiffel Tower, an apple pie, a bicycle, a buffalo, all unrelated things, just all together in a big collage. And he showed the collage for about 3 seconds. It was kind of up, there it is, and then it would come down. And then he said to all of us, okay, write down what you saw. So we all pulled out a piece of paper and wrote down everything that we could think of that we would remember that we saw. And most people were able to write down 5, 6, 7 things. So that was great. And you'd write them down. So the first person would speak and say what she saw, and she'd say her 7 things. The next person would speak, and maybe 2 of the 7 were the same, but 5 were things that the first person hadn't written down. And as we went through, no one had the same 7 things written down. Some people had none that overlapped. Some had a few that overlapped. And what we saw was that everybody looked at exactly the same thing in exactly the same place at exactly the same time. And the impression of what we saw when we looked at that was different depending on who we were and where we were sitting, for one. And 2, no one saw everything. Everyone saw a piece of it. When we looked at the things seen by the entire group, that was a much greater range of things that had been seen than any one person saw. And it sort of was an illustration of the fact that we can all look at the same thing. We see it slightly differently. We record certain things stick in our minds, and no one of us can see everything that there is to see at any given time. And really, by working together, we expand our knowledge of what is there. And it was just kind of a little exercise to show that there's a different perspective, and that you and I can look at the same thing and see different things, and we're both exactly correct, and that we enhance each other by sharing that information. So that was one experience that I enjoyed. The practice that we did, this is something we did at UC Irvine. We had a thing called the Olive Tree Initiative. And we had in the Olive Tree Initiative students who were, one significant group of the members of this initiative were Jewish. Another significant fraction were Muslim, Middle Eastern, Palestinian. Others were Christian. And they would study together the circumstances in the Middle East, and then take a trip of generally 2 or maybe as long as 3 weeks to the Middle East and meet with different people in different communities there. West Bank, Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, just they would meet with different people. And then the group would come back, and one of the things they did, they would work together, but they would also give a panel where they would talk to an audience of community members. I went to several of these. And a couple of things were true. The first is that they arrived at this initiative with different traditions, different narratives that they had lived under throughout their entire lives. And the narratives sometimes were exactly opposite. And part of this initiative was not to get you to change your mind or to think like me or you or anything else, but to understand that there were different points of view on this same set of facts. And so the discussions focused on that a lot. And the other thing that I noticed in listening to the students talk and watching them on stage, I didn't necessarily know them. I would have met them once or twice, but not knowing them well, is they had like a 2 or 3 minute summary of their trip. And I routinely want to emphasize as I say this, I couldn't tell, they'd have to go through 3/4, 80% of their discussion of their trip before I knew which tradition they had been raised in, if they didn't tell me. So I couldn't tell who was Jewish or who was Muslim by them describing what it was like to go to this place where my family was raised for generations, and it has the holiest and most sacred sites in my religion, and a place for my cousins. They say all these things, but it wouldn't tell me which perspective they were bringing to the conversation. And then they would tend to say something that would let you know, but I couldn't tell by looking at them. They didn't look differently. And the words about what they experienced and what they felt were the same, although they were describing it from completely different directions. And what we thought was valuable is that they could understand that and engage in those discussions. So that example, I just hope that we can continue to foster, at least on our campuses, engaging in discussions where people, whether they agree or not, they come from a different perspective, a different narrative, and they share the fact that they see things in a different way. Longer answer that I was planning on giving, but it's, I think, a really important thing for us to try to foster.
Very important, and there's many opportunities for the university to be a leader in fostering these kinds of programs. That was a very beautiful story. My final question, during your first year as president, UC has faced unprecedented challenges as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as social unrest. what leadership strategies have you found effective in guiding the UC system through this?
Well, one leadership strategy that I recommend is to have really wonderful people working with you. I think that's a good have a great
Sure,
team.
sure.
And we in the university are blessed with having really committed, knowledgeable, outstanding people to work with. So I think that's important. My more specific answer is that I've for years done what I could to espouse and then to practice values-based decision making, so that I try to have values that I stick to and try to apply them to decisions that I make really all the time, every day, and to try to know what's important to me and why, and what the outcomes we'd like to see are, and then be consistent and transparent and thoughtful in applying those values and making decisions based on them, and then trying to do my best to listen, and then to marry what I'm hearing with experiences that I've had, things that have worked or things that haven't worked, to try to then work with my colleagues to move things forward. This has been a year like no other. I could not overstate what a challenging year this has been. Our enterprise is very complicated to start with. The world is complicated to begin with. To overlay on that the pandemic, which has had such horrific impacts and horrifically differential impacts on our communities, to focus on the reckoning that we're having with social justice and racism in the country, to try to manage our education and research enterprise while we've had to go remote, to manage our working colleagues, our staff, through the budgetary hits that we had through this year, and as we're looking forward to a better budget next year. These have been things that just weren't true when these jobs were considered to be extraordinarily different or difficult, 18 months ago. So we've had everything that we need to do normally, plus these extra challenges. And I will say that the quality and the dedication of our students and our faculty and our staff to keep the university moving forward through these times has been truly inspiring, and has helped us be as strong as we are and looking forward today. So I appreciate that very much.
Great. Well, thank you. And speaking of the management tip to surround yourself with great staff, this is the time when I'll turn things over to our Associate Director, Cindy Simmons, and our staff member, Brooke Miller-Jacobs, to help handle questions from the audience.
Great, thank you so much, President Drake, as well as Dr. Kravitz. And so I'm just going to give Brooke just a sec here to go ahead and turn off the recording.